I didn't set out to become a gemstone miner or a gem rock miner. That was not in my head to start. I was working power line construction in the Dells, Oregon. And November came around that fall, and it was a real wet November, super wet. And we started getting our, I was working with the crew that was the pioneer crew building the first road across the countryside. And my job was to talk to all the ranchers and explain to them what was going on and put the gates in. When we crossed a rancher's property line, it had to have a gate. And it was my job to put that gate in. And at the same time, I was taking care of the cat skinners, what they call the wagon or the truck that supports the cat skinner, they call it the crummy. It hauls man and fuel and equipment or whatever. It's usually a 2-ton truck, you know. So I was driving the crummy and putting in gates. And then November came along, and we had a super heavy rain and everything got muddy. Even the cats, the E8 cats, were getting stuck. And then the boss decided, well, that's it, we're going to shut down and wait for this country to dry up a little bit first. So they shut the company shut everything down, and then of course laid off the employees. I was laid off. I didn't have a job. And while we were putting the power line in across the Deschutes crossing, I met Hood Elkins that had the Deschutes Jasper. And so I was going along there one day, you know, with that crummy, and he was standing there, and I stopped and started talking to him. And he said, well, are you finding any rock? And I said, yeah. I said, we're pushing it out all day long with that cat. I didn't know what he meant by rock. Mm-hmm. Oh, he says, I mean this kind of rock. And he pulled out a polished piece of Deschutes Jasper and gave it to me. It was just a little guy about that long, about that wide. And I know my eyes bugged out and looked like they were probably sticking out on pipe stems, you know. But, and so yeah, I said, no, we haven't found that kind of rock. And so, and then I asked him, I said, well, where would a guy find some picture rock, you know? And he said, well, you just go to Biggs down the road about 7 or 8 miles along the highway there. They've been digging it, you know. That's where the Biggs Blue was found 2 or 3 years prior to that, in '65. And so then we got laid off in November. Well, then I knew where to go because who told me where to go. And so I went over there and started digging. And I dug, I didn't dig on weekends. And I had a hole it was about 10 or 12 feet above the level of the highway. And I had a tunnel going back in there. It was on Jasper. But the Jasper was all clear. It didn't have any picture in it. And then on weekends, I wasn't working there. I didn't work on weekends. There's too many people around, you know, right on a busy highway, 97. So then I'd come to work Monday morning, and then I'd see what was done over the weekend, because most people didn't bother. But that last weekend, somebody had went in there in my tunnel and done some digging all weekend. And you could see where they had removed rock and had the stuff laying down there. And whoever it was really didn't know that much what they were doing, because they didn't check the Jasper in the ceiling. They checked all the Jasper all the way around, and it was all just plain Jasper. And I went in there and I said, well, it looked like they didn't chip the ones on the ceiling. So I chipped the first rock on the ceiling, and then there the picture was. And that evening I had 1,250 pounds of rock in the back of that 50 Ford pickup, and it was like this. And I was, even though I was a beginner, I was kind of aware that I would like to get this rock under wraps before somebody saw it, you know, so that I had time to deal with it properly. And about then a car squealed their tires, and there was a wide pull-out there, and this car pulled off in this pull-out, and a woman got out and come running over there, and she walked up to my truck, you know, oh my goodness, this is really looking good, you know. And she said, are you going to sell it? I said, well, I don't know, I guess I would. Well, she says, give me your name and address, which I did. I was staying in a motel. And so I gave her my name and address and everything. She says, my husband runs the Obsidian Motel in Bend, Oregon, and tomorrow he will be at your place to talk to you about buying this rock. And the next day, his name was Bob Mitchell, and the next day he showed up. And he said, well, he says, would you sell all this rock? I said, sure. And he said, how much? I said, $1 a pound. $1,250. I never went to work for anybody again. That got me started in the rock business. Yep. Well, then from there, I found out about the petrified wood forest on the Deschutes River. That was a forest about 3 miles long. And I found out about that, and then I started digging petrified wood. I dug petrified wood for about 3.5 years. Bought a brand new truck off of that dig. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. It was a '68 4-wheel drive Ford. In '68 cost $4,000. Can you imagine? Compared to today's prices. So, yeah, and then I was off and running then. The petrified wood, lasted quite a while, and I met all these rock dealers in Oregon. And one time I actually took a load of rock. Some of it was picture Jasper from Doofer, and I took that load of rock clear down to L.A. and then clear almost all the way to Dallas, Texas before I got it all sold. And when I got home, it really didn't pay very much, although the expenses then wasn't so much either, so. And then from the wood, I went prospecting over here and found the Rocky Butte mine. And so I filed a claim on it in '72, and mined it for 7 or 8 different years. The seasons I worked in the summertime at Rocky Butte and the wintertime at the Bruno Jasper claim. So I had to haul my equipment back and forth twice a year and move camp and everything. So yeah.
So you've dug Bruno significantly. You've dug
Yeah.
Morrisonite significantly. You've dug Graveyard.
Yeah.
There's a number of other places. Wild Horse, Rocky Butte.
Rocky Butte, not Wild Horse.
Not Wild Horse.
Not
Rocky
Wild Horse.
Butte.
Rocky Butte, I found that in April of '72. I had that mine by myself for quite a few years, and then I sold it, got cash for it.
Did you ever dig Oahe?
No, I didn't dig Waihee, no.
No? What else? What other picture Jaspers?
Well, on a grand scale, Rocky Butte was about it. I dug all these other sites just as prospects, moving around, walking and hiking, My idea was the book that Hans Gamma put out, and I found all the way in Jaspers. My idea at the time when I first started looking for that stuff, and I worked at about 6 or 7 years at doing that. My idea was I just wanted to get a small sample, a good one, out of each deposit where I could make a cab for my collection out of that deposit. That's all I wanted to do. That was my original goal. And I did that and more. But that was the drive that got me to going to do it all that, walking for 7 years, or whatever.
You found did you find a lot of these deposits yourself? Like where did we go the other 3 years ago? The Rose?
The actual deposits that I found myself that were brand new was very few. Shadow Mountain was about the only one I think that I found that's a brand new mine that nobody knows where it's at because I won't tell them, So, yeah, Shadow Mountain was one that I found. It's a real nice rock. It's a high-grade rock too. But the rest of them were all found by people in the '70s and '80s. It was found by, I was kind of on the north end of that picture rock country. I was working Rocky Butte at the time, and I never met these people. I didn't even know that they were digging and prospecting. I didn't know any of that because I was so busy working Rocky Butte. I had an order for a while there out of Florida for 1 ton a month. And so I had to work hard to get that ton every month and to get it to Boise for shipping, and so. But, all the while I was doing that at Rocky Butte, that all these people were working south of me, finding all these deposits down there, like Craig Gulch and Painted Desert and all of those. And I don't know those people, and I don't know the name they had on the rock they found. I don't know what the original name was. So when I went in there to get my samples for this deal I was doing, I made up my own names for these deposits. You know, practically all of them are made up names that I came up with. You know. That's around.
And that's how they're recorded in Hans Gamma's book?
Yeah, in Hans Gamma's book.
Yeah,
those names, you know, there's a list of a mile long there of the names. So most of those names I came up with. Usually with the help of a little wine. A little wine and time.
A little wine, you get real creative, don't you?
Yeah, you come up with those good names. Well, you know, when I first found the Rocky Butte mine, I didn't have a name for it. And then,
how do you come up with Rocky Butte?
Yeah, I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
Anyway, I got out a map, and I'm looking for names that were kind of short but had a ring to it. And I'm looking around, and here's one that's called Rocky Butte. There is a real place called Rocky Butte. It's on the map. I said, well, I'm going to use this name, and if people are going to come and steal rock from me, they can go over here to the real Rocky Butte. Maybe they'll find a good rock over there someday. And so that's how I come up with the name, Rocky Butte. Yeah.
Rocky Butte, but it's really not on Rocky Butte.
But it's not on Rocky Butte, no. Yeah.
So I met you when I was about 9.
I think you were about 9 years old. It was at the Wiggins Fork of the Wind River
in
Wyoming. Yeah.
So you met me in my true home.
Yeah, your home at that time was green in color. It was called an army tent.
Well, it didn't look much different than your tent. You had one of those old army tents. I remember the white one.
Yeah.
And you had a hot stove in there.
Yeah.
That piped up so you could have a hot wood burning stove.
Those are called wall tents, or in this country they're called sheepherder tents.
I always thought it was the coolest thing.
And then Hans Gamma in Scottsdale or Phoenix, Arizona, he calls them a house tent.
A house tent.
House tent, yeah. But they're a sheepherder tent in this country. Yeah.
They're really neat. They have that first room that's a screened-in walkway.
It's just one room.
But then you had it walled off somehow.
We hung up probably a blanket or something.
And you had a bedroom in there.
And the bedroom on the back part.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the stove on the front part, and the eating stuff in the front part. Yeah, makes a good camp.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I've lived several winters in one like that. As a matter of fact, the year it got 20 below in Bruno Canyon, I was living in that tent, 8 by 10 foot tent that you saw at Wiggins Fork. Yeah, same tent.
And that wood stove worked well enough to keep you warm?
Well, it worked kind of, but it was so cold. And so what I did, I came up with the idea, why don't you take this, it was an 8 by 10 wall tent, why don't you buy a 10 by 12 wall tent and put it over the little tent, which I did the next year, and it was balmy all winter. It never did get cold.
Huh. Just that little bit of insulation.
It made a space about that wide between the two tent walls, and that's where I stored my firewood there and kept it dry, you know. Made a good camp.
That's like a semi-wall.
Yeah. It was a wall of air, you know, and so a dead air space in between the two, you know. It worked good. Yep.
Nice.
Works really good, yep.
So you're not, the camp you had at Bruno.
Yeah.
Did you use that tent?
Yeah,
out there
yeah.
With the wood burning stove?
Yep.
But I heard you had a bathtub out there.
Yeah, there was a bathtub there. No, I didn't bring the bathtub in there. Somebody else brought it in years ago. They brought a heavy cast iron bathtub. Actually, what a lot of people would love to get their hands on today, that kind. But they took it down there, and there was a hot spring there where it come out of the rock. The water come out of the rock, almost filled a hole that big. It was that much volume running into the Bruno River, yeah. So we had a little galvanized pipe off to the side to get that water and run it over to the tub. But you had to do it the right way, otherwise people would come down there for the hot springs to enjoy the bath. But when the person had a bath, what he was required to do so that someone could have a bath again the next day was to fill the tub hot full of that 167-degree water. Then the next evening that water was cold and you could put enough hot water away, it was just right. Well, if they were run off and forgot to put water in the tub, you didn't get a bath for that day. You had to wait till the next day. That happened not too frequently. Once in a while it did happen, though. Hikers would come all the way down in there, hike down in there just for that bath.
Just for the bath?
Oh, crazy people, yeah. Yeah, really. Yeah, I had my tractor down there, and So I went down there, and then where that water run down to the flat, there's a gravel flat there, and then it run about maybe 200 yards over to the river. Well, I picked a spot down there where that water was. It was kind of wide. Well, I made it a little wider, and I made me an island right in the middle with hot water going around both sides of that island. And then what I did was I made my garden there, and I had garden year-round on that ground there.
Oh, because it kept it warm.
It kept it warm in the wintertime. I could grow stuff all winter long there. Perfect.
So, like, wintering out at Bruno was
Oh, it was so
easy.
easy. So easy.
You have fresh food.
Fresh food,
Your
and then
insulated
there was
tent, your
rainbow
hot
trout in the creek, and a hot bath, and deer on the hillside. And that's where I learned how to make bread. Was that
Sourdough bread?
No, it was kind of a pound cake. It was a pound bread. Yeah. No, wait, more than a pound.
With
bread.
that bread that you make in the pan that you bury underground?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had fresh vegetables and fresh bread
Yeah,
and fresh
I
meal.
learned how to make the bread there, and then the meat off of the hill, fish out of the creek. What more can you want, you know?
You really don't know. That sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah. I had a roof over my head and plenty of food to eat.
And rocks to dig.
And rocks to dig.
To boot.
Yeah. And I own 1/4 of the claims there, so how can you have a better world?
I don't know. That sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, as a rock digger, why, it was beautiful, yeah. So I dig Bruno in the winter, and then in the summertime, I'd move back over and dig Rocky Butte picture Jasper over here, and yeah.
So miners don't mine that way anymore. It's like
I guess not.
You're in and out for a short amount of time. They don't get to experience this environment that you created back in the day for mining.
Well, you know, I owned my own equipment. I didn't have to pay rental or anything. I didn't have any overhead at all except for just diesel fuel. And so life was much more relaxed. I mean, if I didn't feel like working today, well, I didn't work. You know.
Oh, how nice.
And if I wanted to go fishing, I went fishing, you know. And that's how life was down at Bruno, you know. And of course, I would like to get a certain amount of Bruno, which I did quite a few times, but not every time would I get a certain amount of Bruno. And then I made a deal with the guy that I got the claims from, the interest in the claim. Ed Brandt from Napa owned 1/4 of those 5 claims, and he sold me that interest on those 5 claims, with the understanding that every time I brought Bruno to town, I would give him the first opportunity to buy the Bruno. And that was all I had to do to own the claims. And he continued to buy Bruno for several years that way. And even though I raised my price gradually from $2 to $3 to $4 to $5, he never did complain about the prices that I put on it. So.
Well, I wouldn't complain.
Well, he realized he was getting a real bargain. So.
Yeah. First pick.
And it was great for both of us. You know, he was getting some good rock at a decent price, and I was being able to mine rock, you know,
and have complete control over it.
Yeah, and have complete control of my share of that deal, you know. So it was a good deal for both of us. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, it was good while it lasted.
Good while it lasted. It lasted a long time.
How many years were you there?
I was there approximately 7 winters. I just mined it in the wintertime, 7 years. Yeah.
There was one year that you went without shoes.
Yeah, that was one of
Was that at Bruno?
That was the best summer I ever had in my life. Was at Bruno Canyon. I went barefoot all summer.
All summer.
My feet got just as black as them rocks, and the soles of my feet were about that thick.
You
I could even walk up to the mining claim and prowl around, you know, do a little putzing around by hand, you know, barefoot. I stayed barefoot. I never wore shoes all summer. And that ground gets about 120 degrees in the summertime. That's what makes your feet black, walking on that hot ground. But your feet are so callous and so thick on the bottom, it don't bother you at all. You got to start this in the spring, you know. The best way for most people to start it is to build a little sandbox about that big, and then put about 1.5 inches of gravel, pea gravel in it. And every day walk 10 or 15 minutes on that pea gravel. Start that in March. By May, you're ready for the outdoors. Walking around like this won't bother nobody. You know.
Huh.
Yeah. That's what I did. It worked for me. Yeah, I did that 1 year. Yeah, that was great.
So what was the benefit of going without shoes?
I just felt so healthy.
You felt healthier?
Yeah, I felt healthier.
How did you feel healthier?
I don't know. I just was free to run around anywhere I wanted to go, and not encumbered by shoes and boots and stuff, you know. I just like doing it.
Huh.
Yeah.
It was freeing?
Well, it was kind of an experiment to begin with. It was an idea I had early that spring. I started with that sandbox and gravel, you know, and then one thing led to another, and my feet got thicker and thicker. And,
just to see if you could do it or not, or?
well, probably.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just to see if it's really doable, because the Indians did it. That was
They
just
did.
that was the way they lived.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I got to find out how the Indians' foot looked like too. Then, you know. They were that big too, and black like mine.
I bet if they were running through this is just chips
oh,
of rock
you could
everywhere.
walk around this stuff no problem when you're barefoot. Yeah. And actually, they say the healthiest way for human beings to walk. This might have got me thinking about it originally. The healthiest way for human beings to walk is to walk barefoot over uneven ground. And they also say, the Indians came up with a saying, that the more you have on your feet, the less respect you have for the ground. And I can see where that part is true. Yeah, it really is true.
Just connect with Earth, maybe.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
Yep, right.
The way you're naturally supposed to.
And and then also, you know, being so I'm in this rock business, or was, I had the thought many years ago. There's so many people in the world that don't know anything about a rock, and they walk around rocks, they walk over rocks all day. They never pick up a rock and look at it. Never. And I found that amazing, that you never even look at a rock. I just, it blows me away. I can't get over it. You know?
Important.
Yeah.
And like, I always tell people about the story of you going a year only spending the money you needed to.
Right. A little over $600.
Little over $600.
Yeah, for 1 year's living. Yeah.
So how did you go about a whole year only spending $600-ish?
Well, I was working at a silver mine out of Oriana, Idaho, and in a place called Pixley Basin, and the mine was the Bluebird Mine. It was a silver mine. It was mined by the English in 1940s, and I had an opportunity to do the mining there, and so what I did was I mined all through the winter months because it's so nice and warm inside the tunnel. But in the summer months when the grass got green, well, I couldn't mine. I was outdoors then, you know. And so I just figured, well, I wonder how cheap I can live for 1 year out here. So I made a conscious effort, and of course, I had a lot of help because I had a garden. I had water piped into my cabin. I had a sweat lodge built, you know, for taking the Indian-style sweat bath. So I basically had, and there was a lot of fish coming out of Castle Creek. I ate a lot of fish, and I had the garden. So my food needs were pretty well taken care of. You know, kind of a halfway a vegetarian. Didn't even know it. You know, didn't know that word then. So, but yeah, and so then that year, while I kept track of the money that I spent, and I didn't go to town very much, and I didn't buy a whole lot of food out of the grocery store like we do nowadays. And so at the end of the year, and then one thing that run the cost of living a whole year on a little over $600 was somebody stole one of the wheels and tires off of my pickup. I was gone fishing or something one day and come back and the right front tire away from the cabin was gone. Well, it cost me almost $100 to put that tire back on the wheel. You know.
Wow.
So that made the cost up to around $650 or a little more than $650, you know, for the year's expenses for living that year. Yeah. And then I read a book by a guy, I forget his name now, but it was a guy from Alaska, and the title of the book was How to Live on $10 a Week for the Rest of Your Life. Well, that's kind of where I got a lot of ideas, and the incentive to go ahead with this 1 year program was through that book, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, it can be done. It can't be done so much maybe on $10, but today maybe if you run that up to $20, you might be able to do it. But you got to live unencumbered out in the country somewhere where you can grow a little of your own food.
Well, when I first started, yeah, I just, there was a few, well, there was maybe two or three picture jasper mines back in the country where I worked. And so what I did was I just homed in on the deposits that were originally found by other people, and then just start going around their place, you know, and then just make bigger and bigger circles and go around and around. And then you just do a lot of walking. You're in country that's got two or three mines. You think there's going to be more mines. You don't know. You know, I was kind of a beginner then, and so I just kept walking that country, you know, and then gradually started finding more things that way. But there are other methods you can use too. Once you understand geology and formations and everything, and then what worked for me was I started with a pair of binoculars, but then I eventually got a spotting scope, 150 power spotting scope, and you can look a long ways through, you know, with glasses, and you kind of know the formations that you're looking at, because there are basalt intrusions in the picture jasper country, but the basalt intrusions will not have picture jasper usually. The rock back there is a volcanic tuff, so if you're looking at a basaltic intrusion a mile and a half away with your telescope, you won't go there to look for jasper because you won't have any. So you look for eroded outcrops of the volcanic tuff, and that's where the field glasses and the telescope comes in handy. And then you just walk over, you spend a whole day walking over there and around in that area, and maybe you'll find something, maybe you won't. Then the next day, well, you'll find another good looking area to the left or a good looking area to the right, and you'll go over and spend a day or two looking at that. And I did that for a number of years. There's that picture jasper area that I worked at covers about 100 square miles, and I've probably covered about 80% of it in about 7 or 8 years. You just do a lot of walking. I don't know of any other way, you know.
You know, mining, this world is changing. You know, old prospectors and miners operated much differently than what miners are today.
Right, right.
You know, do you think there's a future for mining? Do you think that this is gonna, how is this gonna affect the next group of miners?
Yeah, well, I'm not exactly for sure on the miner itself, you know. It kind of takes a special kind of person and with a certain mentality to get into mining to begin with. Miners are born optimists to begin with, and as long as there are collectors with money, there will always be someone that will mine a rock for that collector. If a guy's going to pay $100 a slab for a nice agate, there's going to be somebody to find that agate for him, and there'll be a miner. But by and large, because it's a finite resource, but even though there's been a lot of different places and sites found out here in this picture jasper area, there's a lot more to find out there, a lot more. And I found my share of new ones too, you know, and I didn't begin to exhaust what's out there, you know. And my original thought or idea about, other than the fact that I was trying to collect a sample of cabochons from each deposit, but behind that thought was the fact that I thought there's another Waihe jasper out here, there's another Rocky Butte jasper out here, and I'm going to find it. But I just never did. I kept looking, I just never found it. You know. But I still think it's out there. Yep, I do. Whether the newer generation of people coming up, whether they will endeavor to follow those routes, I don't know. You know, it just the way things are going now, what I see amongst the younger people is they're going more into these computers and things, you know, and they're not interested in earth science so much, you know. But who knows? Something can happen almost overnight that changes that too, you know. Yeah. I mean, you're really looking out there long term, and it's hard to visualize that far out. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Well, we can just worry about today.
So, yeah, what I noticed in the last 10 or 15 years in the gemstone or gem rock business, a couple of things I noticed real strong. A lot of people are getting into it strictly for the money. They don't have the love of the material that us old timers had. We loved the rock itself, and we weren't so concerned with making a big bunch of money or anything. We wanted to get the best rock. We were interested in the rock. But I see dealers at shows. Well, when I quit the shows 3 or 4 years ago, I see dealers into it, and they're just strictly in it for the monetary purpose. You know, they have no love for the real rock or anything. They'd handle basalt if it brought the same amount of money. You know, and of course I tell people that Gene would come out here digging, even if he could only dig basalt, he'd be out here digging because he loves his country out here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if he starts digging basalt, don't be surprised.
So I guess you had plenty to eat then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Everything you had, just no meat.
No. Yeah, a lot of veggies, a lot of onions, a lot of tomatoes. Maters, taters, and hell. That's what we raised. Maters, taters, and hell.
Hell.